I never expected to witness something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about history and faith. An alien claimed to know a hidden part of Jesus' history, and what he said surprised me. What if everything we were taught about miracles, parables, and the life of Jesus was incomplete? What if his greatest secret wasn't meant to be worshipped, but remembered, activated, and felt as a frequency that every human once possessed? Tonight, I'm inviting you to step with me into that hidden reality, to see what the world forgot, and to feel truths that can shift how you live. Stay with me, because every second carries revelation, every word is a clue. Comment below where you're watching from, like if your mind is opening, and share this with someone ready to question everything. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next isn't just a story, it's an awakening. Now, let me take you to the moment I met Zarek, the alien who revealed what humanity lost and why it changes everything we thought we knew about Jesus. My life, for most of my 47 years, could be summed up in 2 words: predictable silence. I lived on the edge of a small town, where the nights were always the same. Crickets, wind against the window, the distant hum of a passing truck. Nothing unusual, nothing unexplainable. And I liked it that way. Or at least, I thought I did. But everything changed on a night that began like any other. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the same familiar sounds, when something subtle shifted. At first, I could not place it. A feeling, barely noticeable, brushed against me like static clinging to skin. Then, little by little, the world around me began to lose its edges. The crickets stopped first. I did not notice immediately, but when I did, the silence felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. The wind faded next, as if someone had placed a glass dome over the land. Even the faint hum of distant machines, a sound I never truly paid attention to, suddenly vanished. I leaned forward, confused, wondering if maybe a storm had rolled in without warning. Then the temperature dropped. It happened fast, like a sudden exhale from something enormous and unseen. One moment the air was warm, the next it wrapped around me in a cold tightness that made every hair on my arms rise. The mug in my hand felt heavier. My breath puffed out in thin mist. I should have gone inside, closed the door, turned on the lights, and pretended the night was normal. But curiosity has a way of pressing its thumb into a person's spine, pushing them to stand when they should run. A pressure built in my chest, not painful but unmistakable, like the air itself was thickening. I tried to swallow, but the tension only grew stronger. I stepped off the porch, each footfall sounding too sharp, too loud against the silence. The world no longer felt empty. It felt crowded, as if something unseen had stepped into the room and was now waiting for me to notice. And beneath all of it, beneath the cold, the silence, the pressure, something else drifted through the air. A presence, approaching, moving toward me with slow, deliberate certainty. That was the moment I realized my life would no longer split into before and after. It would split into the night I thought I understood reality, and the night everything I knew unraveled. The world did not return to normal after the silence. If anything, the quiet deepened, as if the air itself were holding its breath. I followed the strange pull in my chest, something both foreign and familiar, until my footsteps carried me beyond the edge of town and into the open fields that had always felt like a second home. But that night they felt different, as if the soil remembered something my mind had forgotten. The temperature kept dropping with every step. By the time I reached the clearing, the cold felt almost deliberate, like it was guiding rather than punishing. Then the pressure returned, heavier than before, settling on my shoulders and lungs with a kind of invisible weight that made each breath feel borrowed. That was when I saw it. A sphere of light, floating above the field, descending with a slow and deliberate grace. It shone too steadily to be fire, too perfect to be a drone, and too alive to be anything crafted by human hands. The moment it touched the ground, the grass didn't burn or bend. It simply glowed, as if acknowledging an old friend. I should have run. Every instinct born from a lifetime of predictability told me to turn back. But there was another feeling too, something deeper than instinct, as if a forgotten part of me had just awakened and whispered, "You know this." The sphere opened without sound. No hinges, no seams, just a soft parting of light. And from it stepped a figure that made reality itself feel thin, tall, luminous, older than any history book could ever describe. Every pulse of his presence felt like a memory I couldn't access, but somehow recognized. His skin carried a faint radiance, not bright enough to blind, but unmistakably unearthly. His eyes held the calm weight of someone who had seen far more than time itself could measure. Fear rose first, immediate, sharp, human. But right behind it came something impossible to explain. An odd sense of recognition, as if I were not meeting a stranger but encountering someone I had once known in another existence, another life, or another version of myself. He looked at me, and in that silent moment, it became clear that the night my life split in two was not a random accident. It was an appointment. And his name was Zarek. The clearing felt suspended between moments, as if time were reluctant to move forward without permission. Zarek never opened his mouth, never shifted his expression, yet something reached me. It was not sound. It was not thought. It was like a ripple pressed gently against the inside of my mind, forming words without ever becoming words. "Kevin, I have come because you are ready to remember." The message did not echo the way normal speech would. It settled deeper, like it had been waiting in some hidden chamber within me, needing only the slightest touch to awaken. I froze, unsure whether I had imagined it, but the weight of it felt too precise to dismiss. Ready to remember. The phrase bothered me more than the impossibility of telepathy. Remembering implies something once known, and yet my life had been painfully ordinary. Predictable routines, familiar faces, and days that blended into each other without any hint of secrets buried beneath them. The field around us seemed to respond to his presence. The grass no longer shimmered with reflected light, but pulsed faintly, as if harmonizing with some invisible frequency. A strange clarity seeped into the air, the kind that feels like a truth trying to manifest before the mind can fully grasp it. I felt a tightening in my chest, not painful but unmistakably important, as though something inside me recognized Zarek in ways my conscious mind could not. Remember what? The question rose instinctively. But before my thoughts fully formed, he sensed them. The pressure in the air shifted, the temperature warming slightly as if to soothe the fear I was trying to hide. His presence carried no aggression, no demand for obedience. Instead, it felt like standing near an ancient tree that had witnessed centuries and judged none of them. Another pulse reached me. Slow, calm, measured. It carried an unspoken assurance, though the message remained elusive, like a sentence whispered beneath a thick veil. I felt memories stir, not clear ones, but impressions, flashes of light, warmth, a sense of standing in another place, another time, watching a figure whose face I could not fully see. Then, the images vanished as quickly as they came. I wanted answers, yet some part of me sensed they would not be given all at once. Understanding would come, but at a cost. And whether I was ready or not, Zarek believed I was. The night, it seemed, had only begun to reveal its truth. The silence between us grew dense, almost deliberate, as if the universe itself paused to hear what would come next. Zarek's presence did not feel accidental. Even without spoken language, his intention pressed gently against my awareness, shaping thoughts I was not entirely certain belonged to me. I felt the clearing tighten, every blade of grass poised in an unseen anticipation. Another ripple moved through my mind, slower this time, carrying a weight that felt ancient. You believe I came to you by chance, Kevin, but chance has never governed the moments that matter. The words settled deep, stirring a nervous heat in my stomach. I had spent my entire life assuming insignificance was my default condition. Ordinary circumstances, ordinary fears, ordinary failures. Yet standing in front of him, I felt the uncomfortable realization that ordinary might have been a disguise I had worn for far longer than I understood. Zarek's energy shifted, not brighter, but more focused, like a lens gathering light into a single point. His next message carried a gravity that made the temperature around us rise by a few degrees, as if the atmosphere reacted to meaning alone. I did not come to this world without purpose. I came because humanity has forgotten something essential, something it was never meant to lose. The field seemed to tremble at the edge of perception. A faint hum vibrated through the ground beneath my shoes, subtle but unmistakably alive. I felt my heartbeat slow, syncing with that vibration as though it recognized a rhythm more primal than anything human. Humanity was given a message, he continued, one meant to guide, restore, and awaken. But that message has been rewritten, buried, and reshaped to serve purposes far from its origin. I have come because you must hear the part that was lost. A coldness slid through me. I did not breathe for several seconds. There was a shift in the tone of his presence, a reverence mixed with sorrow, as if he were speaking of someone he once knew. The realization came gradually, like dawn breaking through fog. This was about Jesus, not the version taught in churches or painted on stained glass. Something older, something unfiltered, something dangerous to the world that had replaced truth with tradition. Zarek had not come to enlighten humanity. He had come because someone, somehow, had ensured humanity would never hear the whole story. And he intended to reveal why. The air around us thickened with a tension I could not name, as if I were standing at the edge of a truth humanity had tiptoed around for centuries. Zarek did not move, yet his presence expanded, pressing softly against the boundaries of my awareness. His next message drifted into my mind with a quiet gravity, the kind that arrived only when the world was about to change. There is a period in the life of the one you call Jesus that your world has never understood, not because it was hidden by rulers or silenced by institutions, but because humanity slowly lost the consciousness required to perceive it. The words felt like a strike against everything I had been taught. I had heard about the missing years countless times, whispered in documentaries, speculated in late-night conversations, wrapped in theories that stretched from mystical to absurd. But this was different. Zarek spoke of it with the familiarity of someone who had witnessed it, someone who knew the weight of every moment that vanished from human memory. A strange warmth spread through the clearing, subtle but undeniable. It pulsed in slow waves, like echoes of a forgotten frequency. As it washed over me, I felt something unlock inside my mind, as if distant impressions were beginning to surface from places I had never explored. Humanity once saw more than words on pages, Zarek continued. You perceived truth directly, without distortion. But as the collective mind fell into fear, survival, and separation, entire parts of reality slipped from your awareness. Not erased, not stolen, simply unreachable to a consciousness that no longer looked inward. The idea unsettled me more than any conspiracy ever could. If what he said was true, then humanity's gap in understanding was not engineered by power, but by our own spiritual erosion. We were the ones who had allowed the story to shrink, the meaning to fade, the profound to collapse into the ordinary. The missing years were never missing, he added. You simply forgot how to see them. I felt a tremor of unease move through me, because deep down, something about his words felt right. as if history itself were a dimmed light waiting for someone to turn the switch back on. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred, as if the field itself understood the magnitude of what was being revealed. And I sensed, with a growing chill, that Zarek had only begun to peel back the veil. The clearing felt as if it were slowly waking up, responding not to movement, but to revelation itself. Something about Zarek's presence made the air vibrate with a subtle resonance, like a tuning fork struck in the center of the night. His next message entered my mind with a softness that contrasted sharply with the magnitude of what it carried. Humanity once saw more than the physical world. You perceived the fabric beneath it, the living currents that weave through all existence. It was not magic. It was your natural state. The words settled over me like a forgotten memory brushing against my consciousness. I had always assumed intuition was nothing more than coincidence, a quirk of the mind trying to find patterns where none existed. But according to Zarek, ancient humans lived in a constant dialogue with reality, guided by senses that now lay dormant. A gentle pressure gathered behind my eyes, not painful but noticeable, as if my mind were being nudged toward a horizon I had never seen. Zarek's presence grew lighter, almost luminous, as he continued, "You once sensed frequency the way you now sense temperature. You read intentions before a single word was spoken. You saw the glow of emotion, the shape of truth, the contours of lies. Your ancestors navigated life through resonance rather than logic." A quiet shiver moved down my spine. The idea that these abilities were not supernatural gifts but lost instincts made everything feel eerily plausible. It suggested that the world we knew was not the limit of human perception, but the remains of something far greater. And Jesus, Zarek added, lived fully within that original state. He did not rise above humanity. Humanity fell below him. The statement struck with a force that stole my breath. If Jesus operated from a consciousness humans once shared, then the miracles we recited as extraordinary might have been demonstrations of a forgotten birthright. But Zarek did not speak of this with admiration or mythic reverence. There was a sorrow in his message, a quiet lament for a species that had dimmed its own light over generations of fear, conflict, and disconnection. "Modern humans are not blind because they are incapable," he continued. "You are blind because something inside you was allowed to fall asleep." The clearing fell completely still. Somewhere deep within me, a dormant ache stirred, as if waking to its own absence. And for the first time, I wondered whether Zarek had come to remind me of something I had once known too. A faint tremor passed through the clearing, subtle yet unmistakable, as if the ground itself prepared to unveil something long withheld. Zarek's presence drew closer without movement, his energy forming a quiet cocoon around my awareness. When the next message entered my mind, it did not arrive as words, but as unfolding imagery. Gentle at first, then overwhelming. The darkness around us dissolved into a landscape that was not the field. I stood within a vision so vivid it felt like memory, though I knew it belonged to a story far older than my lifetime. Mountain paths stretched across distant horizons. Desert winds carried whispers of languages I could not decipher, yet somehow understood in essence. And walking through these shifting terrains was a figure whose presence radiated a calm I had never encountered before. Jesus did not travel to learn. Zarek's voice softened, threading through the vision like a guiding hand. He traveled to awaken what already lived within him. The scenes shifted again. Snow-peaked mountains, forests dense with ancient trees, remote villages where elders met him with recognition rather than surprise. In each place, something invisible stirred around him, as if the land itself interacted with the light he carried. It was not education he sought. It was remembrance. Every region, every temple, every forgotten corner of the world held a frequency that resonated with a dormant part of his being. "You ask why your scriptures grow silent during these years," Zarek continued. "It is because the human mind, in its current state, could not grasp what he experienced. Not then, Not now. The truth was never removed. Humanity simply lost the lens required to see it. The vision deepened. I saw Jesus standing on a cliff overlooking an ocean that shimmered with a strange, luminous haze. His eyes glowed faintly, not with supernatural power, but with a clarity that felt impossibly human and impossibly divine at the same time. As the waves crashed below, something in his chest expanded outward, rippling through the air like an awakening pulse. He was not becoming something new, Zarek whispered. He was returning to what humanity once was. The vision slowly dissolved, folding back into the quiet of the clearing. The air felt different now, charged with the echo of what I had just witnessed. My heart beat with a slow, heavy rhythm, as if sinking to a truth too vast to fully comprehend. And I realized with a chill that the missing years of Jesus were not erased from history. They were erased from us. The night air pressed against me, heavy and expectant, as if the world were waiting for me to remember alongside Zarek. The visions returned, unfolding with a clarity that made every heartbeat feel amplified. This time, the landscape was not a village, not a desert, not a sea, but a high mountain plateau, shrouded in mist, isolated from all human interference. The winds carried an unfamiliar cadence, resonating through the rocks and stones as though they were vibrating with a secret language. Jesus appeared, alone but not lonely. Every step he took seemed deliberate, guided by an unseen hand, his gaze sweeping over the peaks and valleys with calm awareness. He paused at the edge of a cliff, the mist curling around him like a veil. Then Zarek's presence, deep and resonant, pressed into my mind. He encountered a visitor, Kevin. Not a man of flesh and bone, but a being whose form shimmered beyond conventional perception, a higher intelligence with intent and understanding far exceeding what human senses could grasp. This was the moment that changed everything. The being did not speak, at least not in words, yet knowledge flooded into Jesus's consciousness with an immediacy that made thought itself feel inadequate. Your mind, your capacity to perceive, he communicated, can be expanded. You are ready to access what is always within. The energies you carry can resonate with those of creation if you allow yourself to remember fully. The mountains pulsed in response. Zarek transmitted, their peaks acting as natural amplifiers, channels for the awakening. Every rock, every gust of wind, every distant echo became a conduit, accelerating a process that humanity would later call miracle. But at that moment, it was not miracle. It was alignment. Jesus did not become more than human. He became fully himself, fully aware, fully attuned to the frequencies that all humans once carried but had forgotten. The being guided him, but only subtly, nudging his awareness toward what had always existed within him, the capacity to heal, to transform, to radiate the vibrational state that interacts directly with life. And Zarek's voice pressed into me again, soft but undeniable. Few humans have ever experienced this. Fewer still can maintain it. And the world you inhabit now is not ready to perceive the magnitude of such awakening, which is why history recorded only fragments, leaving the extraordinary invisible to those whose senses have been dulled. I felt a chill that cut through my chest, not of fear, but of recognition. I realized that the Jesus of legend had been more than teacher, more than healer, more than man. He had been a human who remembered, and someone or something had ensured that memory would remain hidden from most of us. The air grew denser, electric almost, as though every molecule had shifted to anticipate the story Zarek was about to unfold. The clearing felt unreal, a threshold between what I knew and what I was about to remember. I could feel the pulse of something beneath the ordinary world, a rhythm that had gone unnoticed by human senses for centuries. Zarek's presence was no longer merely beside me. It pressed into my mind, shaping perception, guiding understanding. Jesus, Zarek began, entered what your ancestors would call an initiation chamber. It was not a room of walls and doors, but a structure designed to resonate with the body, the mind, the spirit, amplifying frequencies that had been dormant since birth. It did not demand belief, it demanded awareness. Kevin, I want you to feel this, not as a story, but as an imprint. The chamber interacted with every particle of his being, vibrating at a frequency that the human body once recognized instinctively. The sounds were inaudible, the lights were imperceptible, yet every cell responded, every thought trembled, every heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the cosmos itself. I tried to imagine it. A man, fully human, lying within a chamber that touched dimensions beyond comprehension, not through faith, but through recognition of what had always existed. I wanted to dismiss it, rationalize it, but the subtle tremor in my chest made disbelief impossible. Something about it resonated, like a distant chord I had forgotten how to hear. The initiation was gradual, iterative. Not instant awakening, but incremental alignment. Frequencies layered upon one another, dissolving fear, dissolving separation, dissolving the habitual resistance that clouds human perception. Zarek's words painted each step with precision. He did not teach Jesus to heal. He reminded him that healing was already the natural state of an awakened being, and as the chamber pulsed, Jesus' consciousness expanded. Memory unfolded, not of events recorded by history, but of capacities humanity had abandoned. The ability to perceive energy, to sense intention, to operate from a state of alignment rather than reaction. Zarek pressed this into me gently, a subtle insistence. It was possible. It had always been possible. I felt a weight settle in my chest, the kind of understanding that trembles between disbelief and revelation. The world I knew, the life I lived, seemed narrower suddenly, as though I had been inhabiting a shadow of what had always existed. And I realized, with a quiet, chilling certainty, that the initiation Jesus underwent was not unique to him. It was a path available to any human who remembered. The clearing felt impossibly vast, though the trees and hills were exactly where they had been. Zarek's presence had settled into a quiet insistence, pressing not upon my ears, but into the deepest recesses of thought. The air around me shimmered with something I could not name, like the subtle vibration of an unseen river beneath solid ground. His words arrived directly into my mind, clear yet carrying the weight of centuries. Jesus did not come to teach, he began. He came to remind. I felt the words ripple through me, and I realized immediately that this was not an abstract concept. There was an intensity to Zarek's presence, a kind of truth so ancient that it bypassed reason and lodged itself directly into perception. Every miracle, every healing, every act recorded in memory or legend was not an exception, not magic, not divine favor. It was demonstration. Demonstration of what humanity had once embodied naturally. The vision unfolded, more vivid than anything I had ever imagined. I saw Jesus walking among people, touching the sick, raising the fallen, calming storms, but the ordinary eyes of the people could not perceive the mechanism. They saw results and attributed them to mystery, to God, to divine selection. Zarek explained that they did not understand because the ability to perceive frequency, to sense the vibrations of life itself, had already begun to fade. Humanity had started to close itself off, piece by piece, over generations, until the natural state of love, empathy, and awareness became a faint echo. Jesus, however, remembered. Not taught, not instructed, remembered. His consciousness aligned fully with the original human capacity that modern humans call impossible. The field he carried was constant, emanating without effort. And wherever it touched, life responded. Fear dissolved, illness dissolved, separation dissolved, all not because of faith, but because the frequency itself was whole and intact, a resonance that could not be denied by the body, the mind, or the soul. I felt a shiver pass through me as the realization settled. Every act of healing, every moment where the impossible became possible, was a reminder of what the human being had always been capable of. This was not restricted to Jesus alone. Humanity had once shared this capacity, fully, universally, as natural as breathing. The reason it seemed extraordinary now was not that he was special, but that we had forgotten. Zarek's tone deepened, carrying a subtle sadness that threaded through the night. Humanity lost access to this frequency not by punishment, not by design, but by neglect. Choices driven by fear, separation, judgment, and doubt accumulated across generations, building a barrier that obscured remembrance. Jesus came to dissolve that barrier, not by demanding obedience, not by teaching morality, but by walking among people who could no longer remember and embodying the truth they had lost. And as the clearing pulsed around me with the residual echo of his presence, I understood something unsettling and profound. Every story we have been told about miracles, every legend we have cherished, was not about supernatural beings or divine exceptions. It was about humanity remembering itself. And if one could pierce the veil, even a little, the same capacity could awaken in anyone willing to receive it. For the first time, I felt the enormity of what Zarek had brought me here to witness. It was not just history, it was potential, our potential, and it had always been waiting. The clearing deepened into a quiet so thick it felt almost tangible, as though the night itself had paused to listen. Zarek's presence hovered, subtle yet insistent, pressing not on my ears but into the deepest folds of thought. A vibration I could sense more than hear. His communication unfolded directly within me, a stream of understanding that bypassed language and landed as awareness. Parables, he began, were not stories meant merely to teach. They were triggers, vibrational codes embedded in words, sequences of sound and structure designed to resonate with consciousness that had forgotten its own frequency. Humanity read them as allegories, as moral lessons, but their purpose was far more precise, far more profound. They carried echoes of memory that could awaken what had always existed inside the listener, though most could not perceive it. I imagined a crowd gathered, ordinary people on dusty roads and hillsides, listening to Jesus speak. The words seemed simple, yet beneath the syllables and phrasing, a subtle rhythm pulsed. Frequencies encoded in the cadence, in the repetition, in the pattern of story, reached beyond comprehension. For those whose senses had not been entirely dulled, something stirred a faint recognition, a pull toward remembering. It was not understanding in the intellectual sense, but awakening in the most fundamental way. Zarek's voice pressed deeper. The parables bypassed the rational mind, operating directly on the field of consciousness. They interacted with the listener's vibrational state, nudging it toward alignment with what Jesus himself carried constantly. A fisherman, a sower, a mustard seed, these were not random images. They were resonance points, anchors for memory that vibrated with the original human potential. Those attuned could feel the truth without questioning, their bodies responding before their minds could articulate it. I sensed a strange dissonance within me, a tension between disbelief and recognition. It was impossible, and yet the clarity of Zarek's presence left no room for conventional doubt. The idea that words could carry such subtlety, such precise resonance, reshaped everything I thought I knew about communication, about learning, about influence. Parables were not lessons, they were doorways, and only a few were ready to pass through them fully. Jesus' brilliance was not in crafting stories for entertainment or moral instruction. It was in remembering the ancient patterns of consciousness, in speaking in a way that interacted with the fundamental structures of perception. Each word was a key, each pause a pulse, each image a frequency that could awaken a hidden part of the human soul. and yet most missed it. Most interpreted the words as simple lessons, missing the activation entirely. Zarek conveyed a subtle sadness, threading through the understanding. Humanity had long ago dulled its senses, allowing centuries of fear, separation, and judgment to obscure the channels that could resonate with such frequencies. The parables remained as seeds, dormant in the soil of human consciousness, waiting for a vibrational awakening. I felt a weight settle over me, profound and disorienting. What had seemed like stories of old were actually the remnants of a technology older than memory itself, designed not to instruct but to restore. And I realized, with a thrill that almost took my breath away, that if even a fragment of this frequency could be remembered, even a small part of humanity could begin to awaken. Zarek's presence confirmed it silently, the night vibrating with the hidden truth of what had always been possible. The night seemed to thrum around me, a subtle vibration threading through the trees and into the very soil beneath my feet. Zarek's presence carried a weight that was both comforting and unsettling, like standing at the edge of a truth too vast for the mind to contain. The words entered my consciousness with a precision that made disbelief difficult, shaping my awareness as if tuning a string I had long forgotten. Jesus did not perform miracles to elevate himself, Zarek began. He offered humanity something far greater than instruction or spectacle. He offered a living state of consciousness, a frequency of being that could transform perception, dissolve fear, and restore the natural alignment of mind, body, and spirit. This gift was inherent, accessible, and immediate to those who could receive it. It required no intermediaries, no rituals, no absolution from a higher authority. It required recognition and presence. I felt a tightening in my chest as the implications sank in. This was not a story of devotion or faith. It was a narrative of capacity. And the capacity had been rejected. People revered the man, adored the figure, and later worshipped him as divine. But they did not replicate his state. They did not access what he carried naturally. Fear, judgment, and ego overshadowed remembrance. Worship became a barrier, not a bridge. They admired the effect, but could not embrace the process. The vision unfolded. I saw crowds gathering around a radiant figure, hands outstretched toward him, faces lit with hope, but also with expectation. They demanded miracles as proof, tokens to be consumed, not a reflection to be mirrored. And each time, Jesus responded not with anger, but with patient persistence. He continued to radiate, to emanate the frequency that aligned life itself. The energy flowed around him, through him, but it could only transform those who opened themselves fully. Most remained shielded by fear, by the ego's insistence that the extraordinary was separate, beyond reach, exclusive to the divine figure. Zarek's voice pressed into me, resonant and solemn. Humanity was not ready, and yet this was not a failure. The gift was never meant to be hoarded or enforced. It was a reminder, a beacon, a possibility encoded in vibrational truth. Those who failed to recognize it did not destroy it. They merely delayed its unfolding, leaving the majority blind to the mechanism of power that had once been ordinary. I felt a strange sorrow settle within me, mingled with awe. Here was a truth that had always existed, offered freely, and yet human choice had created a veil. Worship replaced embodiment, reverence replaced practice, belief replaced remembering. The gap between the state he carried and the response of humanity grew, a canyon that widened with every generation. And yet, Zarek's tone carried a subtle hope threaded beneath the gravity of revelation. The frequency had not vanished. Seeds remained, hidden in those capable of sensing beyond conditioned perception. The gift was still present, waiting for recognition, waiting for courage, waiting for the hearts and minds that could dare to embody what Jesus had lived. And as I absorbed the enormity of it, I realized that what humanity rejected was not a miracle or a savior. It was the simple, terrifying, infinite possibility of remembering itself. The air around me seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible tension, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Zarek's presence became sharper, yet more subtle, like a vibration just beneath perception. His words arrived directly in my mind, bypassing thought entirely, settling into awareness like water into sand. Jesus, Zarek began, did not confine his warnings to the masses. The parables, the public teachings, were one thing, but in quiet moments, in the company of those attuned to receive more, he whispered truths that would not be heard for centuries. One such message contained a prophecy, not about nations or armies, but about the inner landscape of humanity. It was a warning that humans would one day reach a point where fear, separation, and judgment would dominate consciousness so completely that they would lose touch with their own natural state. I felt a chill as the words sank in. This was not a distant future. It was a trajectory encoded in the choices of countless generations, the cumulative effect of fear replacing love, control replacing freedom, and judgment replacing recognition. Zarek conveyed the message with solemn clarity. The crisis would not be a catastrophe imposed from outside, but a collapse from within. The heart would weaken, the mind would fracture, and the natural resonance of the human soul would become obscured, almost imperceptible. I tried to picture it. A world filled with people, yet profoundly alone. Individuals moving through existence, unaware of their own potential, responding to stimuli rather than creating reality. Connections superficial, empathy fleeting, love reactive rather than constant. The frequency of humanity, once vibrant and self-sustaining, would falter, leaving only shadows of what had been. Jesus had seen it, and in that recognition, he had prepared what he could. But preparation was delicate. The warning was not meant to instill panic, but to plant seeds in those who could remember. Zarek explained that the prophecy was encoded in gestures, in subtle teachings, in interactions that carried energy beyond words. To the untrained, these signals were invisible. But to those whose perception had not been dulled, the whispers carried meaning. A lifeline to awaken consciousness before the crisis became absolute. I felt the weight of centuries pressing against me. To realize that the state of humanity could decline so completely that the natural inheritance of awareness could be buried beneath fear and distraction was almost unbearable. Yet Zarek's presence reassured me. Even in the depth of the prophecy, there was a note of possibility. Humanity could awaken, recover its frequency, and step into alignment once more. The warning was as much a guide as it was a prediction. And I understood finally why Jesus had worked so quietly at the edges, why he had chosen some to teach and others to observe. The world was not yet ready to hear the full truth, but fragments, carefully encoded, could survive. They could ignite remembrance in those willing to perceive, and in that knowledge, I felt a strange, almost terrifying hope. The prophecy was not inevitability. It was a challenge, a whisper through time, waiting for ears capable of remembering the resonance that had never truly left. A subtle tremor ran through the air, as if reality itself were adjusting to what Zarek was about to reveal. His presence became denser, almost luminous, and I sensed that what he would share next was something rarely disclosed, something held in reverence even among his own kind. When his voice finally formed in my awareness, it carried a weight that made the forest feel ancient around us. Zarek explained that his species, long before humanity learned to write on stone or press ink onto fragile scrolls, had developed a different form of memory. They did not archive events as words or symbols. They captured frequency impressions, energetic imprints of experiences, preserved in crystalline matrices that could hold the essence of a moment without distortion. These were not recordings as humans understood them. They were living echoes. The emotion, the intention, the consciousness of the one being observed was stored whole, not interpreted, not altered by translation or time. And among these preserved frequencies, there existed one that his people regarded with unparalleled significance. The record of the one humans called Jesus. The moment he said it, the air felt charged, as though something sacred had just been spoken aloud. I sensed that even Zarek approached this revelation with caution, not because he feared it, but because he understood the magnitude of what it represented. His species had watched Jesus not as a religious figure, not as a myth in the making, but as a phenomenon of consciousness. What he did on Earth, Zarek explained, was so rare that it resonated far beyond the planet itself. Earth's historical record, Zarek continued, was always destined to fracture. Human memory is fragile, human interpretation vulnerable to corruption. Empires rose and fell, councils gathered, translations twisted meaning, and over centuries, the truth about who Jesus was became wrapped in doctrine and fear. Not by accident, not even by pure malice, but by the limitations of a species still learning to perceive truth without bending it through ego. Because of this, Zarek's people chose to preserve the frequency of Jesus in its original form. They recorded not the events alone, but the state of consciousness behind them. They stored his resonance at different points of his life, each imprint revealing how his frequency expanded, stabilized, and eventually radiated at a level that overlapped multiple dimensional layers at once. To them, Jesus was not only a teacher but a signal, a rare recalibration point in the evolution of intelligent beings. Listening, I felt something inside me shift. It was strange to imagine that somewhere, in some crystalline vault beyond Earth, the true essence of Jesus existed unaltered, untouched by human hands. Not as scripture, not as myth, but as pure, undiluted frequency. Zarek added that the reason he showed me these things was not to challenge belief, but to restore clarity. Humanity had inherited fragments, echoes of what once was whole. The galactic record existed so that, when the time came, humans could remember without distortion. And as the forest darkened around us, I realized the implication. The time to remember was no longer distant. It had already begun. The moment I crossed the threshold of Zarek's craft, the air seemed to shift, as if breathing alongside me. The ship was alive, not mechanically but organically, responding to my presence in ways I could feel more than see. Walls pulsed gently with light, subtle currents of color moving like living water, resonating with some part of me I had forgotten existed. It was as though the structure itself knew my thoughts before I formed them, bending and shaping space around my perception. I stepped further in, each movement triggering faint ripples across the surfaces, as if the walls were listening and adjusting to my frequency. The floor beneath me was solid yet soft, not cold metal but a material that absorbed and reflected energy simultaneously. I realized instinctively that the ship's interior was not fixed. It reshaped according to the emotional and mental state of its occupant, responding to vibrations, not commands. Fear or tension tightened corners. Calm or curiosity expanded space. My own heartbeat slowed, reverberating with the gentle rhythm of the ship, and I sensed that I was already part of a system far larger than myself. At the core of the vessel, Zarek guided me toward a chamber that seemed to exist both in space and outside it. The walls were fluid, shimmering in soft golds and silvers, as if memory itself had been crystallized and allowed to breathe. Zarek explained that this was the projection chamber, a place where energetic imprints could be transformed into immersive experience. Here, memories were not merely recalled. They were relived, perceived through every sense and beyond the senses, as if consciousness itself became the medium for observation. I felt a mixture of trepidation and awe as Zarek gestured for me to step inside. The chamber's surface rippled and reshaped in anticipation of my presence, responding to the subtle frequencies I had carried since meeting him. He did not speak. He simply allowed me to stand in the center, to become attuned. And slowly, the boundaries of the room faded, replaced by something vast and unmeasurable. I sensed the first memory approaching, not visual, not auditory, but a living pulse, a vibration of being that wrapped around me. Zarek's thought entered my awareness. This is where the record of Jesus is preserved in its pure form. Not a text, not a symbol, but frequency itself. Every intention, every state of consciousness, every moment of awakening had been stored here. And now, Kevin, you will perceive it not as a story but as truth, experienced directly, beyond interpretation. The first wave of memory enveloped me. It carried warmth, clarity, and an intensity that bypassed the mind, speaking directly to something within me that had always remembered more than I had allowed. Time stretched and folded. The past and present overlapped. I could feel the resonance of life untouched by fear, unshadowed by doubt, flowing through me as if I were standing within the heartbeat of history itself. And in that moment, I understood that this chamber was more than a repository. It was a bridge, a living connection to what had been forgotten, a conduit for remembering the frequency that could awaken humanity once again. Zarek stood silently beside me, a guardian and guide, as I stepped fully into the memory, feeling the weight and wonder of a truth humanity had long dismissed. The experience was immediate, undeniable, and overwhelming, and I knew that nothing I had ever believed about the world or about Jesus would remain the same. The chamber reshaped itself as if sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. Light shifted, forming patterns that pulsed with intention rather than randomness. The air vibrated subtly, brushing against my mind like a whispered current. And I realized I was no longer merely observing. I was participating, my consciousness woven into the memory of someone long gone, yet alive in resonance. The first impression hit me not visually but emotionally. I felt an expansive calm, a presence radiating from somewhere beyond the limits of my understanding. Zarek had guided me to a point where I could sense the field that surrounded Jesus. It was not energy in a human sense, not warmth or electricity, but a living frequency that penetrated the deepest layers of perception. Compassion was not a thought or a choice. It was the state of being, emanating outward, interacting with everything it touched. I understood then that what people later called miracles were simply the natural consequences of alignment, the human body and mind responding to a frequency that it instinctively recognized but rarely accessed. I witnessed him among a crowd, ordinary people drawn not by rhetoric but by resonance. A woman approached, crippled and in pain, and the field around Jesus enveloped her. I felt the shift in her own vibrational pattern as it aligned with his, tension dissolving into clarity. The effect was immediate, unmistakable. Healing was not a performative act. It was a transfer of coherence, a restoration of balance within a living system. The crowd reacted not in awe of a man, but in recognition of the frequency itself. I could feel it ripple through every person present, changing subtle emotional currents, igniting memories of love and belonging that had long been buried. Jesus moved through the village with joy, not the shallow happiness of fleeting amusement, but the profound contentment of one fully anchored in awareness. Every gesture, every glance, every word carried the same vibrational integrity. I realized that his mastery was not in teaching or preaching, but in living. The frequency he maintained was consistent, unwavering, a constant tone that harmonized discord within and around him. I could sense moments when even the skeptics and the fearful softened, their rigid patterns subtly realigning, if only for a brief time, with the field he carried. The experience extended beyond individual acts. I saw him in solitude, meditating, attuning, anchoring the frequency internally before expressing it externally. The chamber allowed me to perceive not just the events, but the intent, the consciousness behind them. Joy, love, forgiveness, and clarity were not temporary. They were his operating state. Every act of kindness, every interaction, every miracle was a natural projection of that inner coherence. I felt a profound shift within myself as the memories unfolded. The realization settled deep. Humanity had the capacity for this same frequency, the same state of being, but had forgotten how to sustain it. And yet, witnessing it firsthand, I could feel that the potential was not lost entirely. It was dormant, waiting for recognition, waiting for resonance, waiting for someone to remember that the frequency was accessible to any being willing to awaken. Zarek's presence reminded me silently that this was more than observation. It was an initiation into the truth that Jesus had carried effortlessly, a vibration humanity could reclaim if it chose to remember. The chamber's light deepened, and the space around me seemed to expand outward into infinity. I could no longer distinguish walls from the void beyond them. Zarek remained beside me, an anchor of presence, yet he did not speak. The memory began to unfold, not as a visual replay, but as a resonance that moved through my entire being. Every cell, every thought, every subtle pulse of awareness tuned itself to the vibration emanating from the figure in the vision. I perceived Jesus standing alone on a hill outside the city. The sun glimmered along the horizon, its light refracting through the atmosphere in fractal patterns I had never before seen. But the brilliance of the sky was secondary to what I felt from him. It was the frequency, a pure, unbroken wave of unconditional love, radiating without effort, without condition. It was not an emotion as humans know emotion, fluctuating and fleeting, but a state of consciousness so stable and profound that it could no longer be resisted or diminished by the presence of fear, doubt, or hatred in others. The crowd below was faintly visible, a ripple of human consciousness, each individual carrying fragmented frequencies of fear, attachment, and longing. And yet, as I felt the resonance of Jesus grow, those fragments began to shift. They did not vanish. They did not transform instantaneously. Rather, they realigned subtly, harmonizing with the purity of his state. His presence was no longer simply influencing. It was calibrating, adjusting the very energetic patterns of life around him. Zarek conveyed silently into my mind that this was the moment of ascension, not a departure from the body, but a complete anchoring of frequency within himself. He had activated a level of coherence that made his physical form secondary to the vibrational field he inhabited. Matter, thought, and energy bent subtly in alignment with this state. I could sense that the molecules in the air, the fabric of the earth, even the unseen currents of human intention, all registered the shift. A resonance of love so complete that it could no longer be denied, a frequency so strong that it acted as a template for consciousness itself. I felt awe, but also an unnerving clarity. The power was accessible, yet it required discipline beyond human habit. It was not for display, not for ritual, not for reward. It was the natural consequence of absolute alignment with the self and the cosmos. Jesus did not create miracles as an external act. He embodied a state that generated miracles as an inevitable reflection. Every healed body, every calmed mind, every sudden understanding in those who approached him was a byproduct of coherence, not intention or divine favor. And then, the wave of frequency expanded outward in a way I could feel radiating through the chamber, through me, through some unbroken connection to the collective consciousness of humanity. I understood that the ascension was not a story of leaving, but a record of anchoring, a demonstration of what humans could achieve if they remembered how to sustain their own internal frequency. Zarek's presence reassured me. He had shown this not to convince, but to awaken. The possibility was real. The potential existed. The state of unconditional love was no myth. It was a resonance waiting to be remembered. The chamber dimmed, a subtle shift in color and texture conveying the gravity of what Zarek was about to reveal. I could feel the space itself leaning closer, as if urging my consciousness to expand and absorb the truth. He spoke not with words, but with vibrations that threaded through my mind, each pulse revealing layers of history I had never imagined. Humanity had not simply forgotten the state Jesus embodied. It had systematically unlearned it, constructing walls between themselves and the frequency that had once been natural. The first layer was fear, pervasive and insidious, embedded in the collective mind. Zarek conveyed images of early civilizations, of humans surviving harsh climates, famine, and violence, their nervous systems alert, sensitive, and reactive. Survival necessitated caution, and caution solidified into fear. Initially adaptive, fear gradually ossified into the dominant frequency of human consciousness, shaping thought, behavior, and culture. I felt it as a vibration of tension, a pulse that restrained the body and mind, narrowing perception, shrinking possibility, and dimming memory of higher states. Judgment emerged as the second layer, a direct offspring of fear. As communities grew, survival instincts evolved into social structures, hierarchies, and moral codes. Humans began to compare, evaluate, and label, not just actions but beings. Judgment hardened into expectation into shame. I sensed the vibration of judgment like a shadow pressing over a bright light, distorting the clarity of consciousness, filtering perception through dense layers of opinion, comparison, and separation. Separation followed, Zarek explained, a natural consequence of judgment. Once humans learned to measure themselves and others, the sense of inherent unity fractured. Community became transactional, alliances strategic, and spiritual states became privatized, hidden, or controlled. The field of collective consciousness, once fluid and shared, fragmented into isolated pockets of individual perception. I felt it as a cold stillness, a gap between what could be experienced and what was accessible to the human heart. Guilt was the fourth layer, a product of fear, judgment, and separation converging. Actions, desires, and natural impulses were suppressed and reinterpreted as moral failures. Humans became habitually constrained, tethered by invisible chains of remorse and self-recrimination. The vibration of guilt weighed like a dense fog over the mind and body, further weakening the natural resonance that Jesus had exemplified. Finally, vibrational collapse emerged, the cumulative effect of these layers. The frequency of love, the internal state that Jesus carried, became inaccessible to most. It was not destroyed, not obliterated, but buried beneath centuries of fear, judgment, separation, and guilt. Zarek's presence beside me pulsed with subtle insistence, a reminder that collapse was not permanent. It could be reversed, layer by layer, if the underlying frequency was remembered and nurtured. I could feel the weight of this fall pressing on me, a historical gravity shaping every human life. Yet, within it, Zarek conveyed a quiet urgency and possibility. The path had been lost, yes, but it remained recoverable. Awareness of the layers was the first step. Understanding the structure of disconnection was the bridge. Humanity had wandered, but the resonance that once anchored love, clarity, and unity still existed, waiting for recognition and reclamation. The chamber pulsed with a quiet intensity as Zarek began to unfold a truth that had eluded human understanding for centuries. I could sense the weight of history pressing into the air, each moment a ripple in consciousness, each choice of human leaders echoing through time. The memory Zarek projected was not about malice or corruption, but about caution, fear, and a profound misunderstanding of human readiness. Early religious authorities encountered teachings of consciousness so advanced, so resonant, that unprepared minds could have fractured under their weight. Zarek conveyed images of scribes and leaders in dimly lit chambers, their hands tracing symbols, scrolls rolling out across wooden tables. They had seen the same frequencies Jesus had embodied, glimpsed the power of alignment, witnessed the coherence of unconditional love as a living, tangible force. But the people around them, the masses reliant on structure and ritual, were vibrating at frequencies too dense to sustain such knowledge. The leaders understood instinctively that presenting the full scope of this power could overwhelm, confuse, or even harm those not yet ready to receive it. I could feel the tension in those historical moments, a mix of reverence, fear, and responsibility. The teachings of Jesus had been radiant, but uncontained. They posed a risk of chaos. Zarek's presence amplified the gravity of the decision. They had to choose between sharing truth in full and risking instability, or simplifying it, translating vibrational mastery into moral rules and stories. They chose the latter. I sensed the subtle vibrations of compromise, the echo of intention laced with limitation. The essence of the original teachings was compressed, parables and allegories becoming the shell of living frequency, moral codes replacing direct experience, obedience substituting for alignment. Zarek explained that this was not evil, but a protective measure. Human consciousness was still anchored in survival-based fear, judgment, and separation. If the masses had been presented with the full vibrational reality of unconditional love, the unprepared nervous systems might have experienced psychic or emotional collapse. Memories of expanded perception could have created panic, confusion, or despair in minds incapable of integrating the resonance. What was designed to awaken potential became, in the hands of leaders, a tool of control. But control not born from malice, only from caution. I felt a strange empathy for those long-dead authorities, seeing them not as villains, but as custodians struggling with responsibility beyond their comprehension. The chamber conveyed the consequences of their decisions. Over time, the subtle shifts of misinterpretation compounded. Teachings intended to trigger remembrance were now codified, rituals replacing resonance, fear layered over freedom, and the capacity to access the original frequency grew increasingly distant. Yet, even in this distortion, fragments of the truth survived, hidden in texts, rituals, and intuition. Like sparks waiting to be rekindled, Zarek's presence beside me vibrated with urgency. Humanity had been softened, not punished, and the truth had been obscured, not annihilated. Awareness of the historical caution was the first step toward reclamation. The original frequency still existed, awaiting those ready to perceive, understand, and remember. I could feel the path, obscured but intact, stretching forward a path Jesus had walked, leaders had hidden, and Zarek had chosen to reveal. The chamber shifted subtly as Zarek's presence deepened, the air vibrating with a resonance I could feel in my chest and bones. The memory he projected was not a literal replay, but a transference of understanding, a frequency I could sense as much as perceive. He conveyed that Jesus, in his final years, had prepared a message that transcended time, one not intended for the crowds of 2,000 years ago, but for a humanity yet to come, an era teetering on the edge of emotional, spiritual, and vibrational collapse. I could feel the weight of that foresight, the magnitude of planning across centuries. Zarek transmitted images of Jesus speaking quietly, not to multitudes but in small gatherings, in secluded gardens, on hillsides where his words would be preserved as vibration, encoded in memory, intention, and frequency. The message was subtle, almost invisible, designed to be inaccessible to those operating solely from fear, judgment, and separation, yet retrievable by those who awakened. It was a beacon, a template of resonance, waiting for human consciousness to align sufficiently to receive it. Kevin, I could sense Zarek's words as more than explanation, they were immersion. The teaching was simple in essence, but profound in effect. To awaken the innate state of unconditional love that every human had once known, Jesus had known humanity would gradually disconnect from this power, that fear, judgment, separation, and guilt would accumulate over generations, muting the frequency of love into near dormancy. He encoded guidance for revival, not as doctrine or ritual, but as vibration, as subtle cues embedded in life, in nature, in the interactions of human hearts, waiting for those willing to perceive and remember. Zarek conveyed that this message was meant to catalyze a cascade, a chain reaction of awakening. Small pockets of resonance, once aligned, would begin to influence others, gradually restoring humanity's lost capacity. Healing would appear, not as miraculous anomaly, but as inevitable consequence of coherent frequency. Compassion would ripple through communities, clarity and empathy emerging as natural expressions rather than imposed ideals. Humans would begin to remember their original potential, the state Jesus embodied and maintained, and with each remembrance, the collective vibrational field would shift. The urgency was palpable. Humanity's disconnection had reached a critical point. Emotional numbness, disorientation, and fear had spread like invisible chains. Yet within the risk lay possibility. Jesus' teaching was a seed, encoded for a time when humans could no longer rely on external authority for guidance. The frequency itself, once accessed, would act as the teacher, the healer, and the awakener. No one needed intermediaries. The power was inherent, dormant, waiting for alignment, waiting for those ready to remember. As the vision receded, I felt the implications settle in my awareness. This was not merely history. It was a call, a warning, and a map, all vibrating invisibly within existence. Jesus' message for the future was alive, and humanity's awakening depended not on belief, but on resonance. Kevin, Zarek's presence pressed softly against the edge of my consciousness, reminding me that awareness alone was the first step toward recovery, and that the path forward was encoded not in texts, but in vibration, frequency, and the return to the state that had once defined human potential. The chamber seemed to pulse with every thought as Zarek's presence deepened, an invisible weight pressing on my awareness, bending perception in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The memory he shared did not rely on words alone. It was a resonance, a living vibration, a pattern I could feel reverberating through my consciousness. Jesus had not arrived to offer salvation in the form humans imagined. He had come to transmit a template, a possibility, a map encoded in frequency for humanity to rediscover its own power. Kevin, I could sense the subtle layers of the world's misunderstanding pressing in on me, centuries of interpretation, translation, and doctrine obscuring the essence of his mission. Zarek conveyed visions of people throughout history, hearts closed and minds constrained, seeking rescue from an external deity, pleading for intercession, unaware that the capacity for change had always existed within them. Jesus had walked among humans, not to perform acts that required worship, but to demonstrate what was possible when one fully aligned with the vibrational field of unconditional love. Each healing, each act of compassion, each moment of presence had been a signal, a frequency, a key. I felt the gravity of the secret Zarek revealed. Humanity had been conditioned to externalize power, to seek guidance from intermediaries, to rely on symbols and ritual, while the true mechanism, vibration, frequency, state of being remained inaccessible. Jesus' brilliance lay not in supernatural ability but in mastery of a state that all humans once possessed. He reminded, not dictated. He activated, not controlled. Yet the world, unprepared for such freedom, interpreted his acts as miracles, externalized his essence, and built systems around awe instead of practice, worship instead of activation. Zarek transmitted images of human history, of civilizations rising and falling, of societies accumulating fear, judgment, and separation like sediment layers pressing against the natural state. The more humanity turned outward for salvation, the further the intrinsic frequency receded, buried beneath generations of inherited limitation. And yet, the code Jesus left was not lost. It persisted as an imprint, faint but coherent, waiting for those willing to perceive, to resonate, to awaken. I could feel the urgency in Zarek's transmission. This hidden truth was dangerous, not because it threatened institutions, but because it threatened the illusion of dependency. Humans who remembered their original frequency could no longer be controlled by fear, guilt, or judgment. They could awaken themselves and, through resonance, awaken others. Jesus had come to remind humanity that salvation was never a gift. To receive it was a state to reclaim, a frequency to embody, a natural inheritance to awaken. As the memory faded, the chamber hummed softly around me. Kevin, the realization settled in my chest like a slow pulse. Humanity had been misled, not by malice, but by its own unreadiness. And now, for the first time in millennia, the possibility of remembering was emerging again. The hidden part the world was never told was that the power to heal, to transform, to reconnect, had never left. It had only been waiting, encoded in the vibrational structure of life itself, ready for those prepared to remember. The chamber shifted again, the walls of pulsating light bending subtly to my awareness. Kevin, I could feel the gravity of Zarek's presence more intensely than ever. It was not threatening, but it demanded attention. A silent insistence vibrating directly in my consciousness. He asked a question that seemed simple in words but carried the weight of lifetimes. Did I wish to receive the activation, to align with the frequency Jesus had mastered, to awaken fully to the vibrational state that humanity had long forgotten? The offer was intoxicating and terrifying simultaneously. Kevin, I could feel the layers of doubt, fear, and hesitation pressing against me. Zarek conveyed that once the activation began, perception would shift entirely. The world I had known, the boundaries of reality, the limitations of human experience would dissolve. Sight, sound, touch, and thought would intertwine with vibration in ways that could not be undone. There would be no return to ignorance, no retreat to comfort, no hiding behind disbelief or habit. The gift carried consequence equal to its power. I sensed the weight of choice across dimensions, the echoes of every human who had once encountered similar openings. The vast continuum of awareness stretching beyond the confines of my understanding. Zarek's voice was calm but resonant, embedding certainty in the spaces between my thoughts. Kevin, he explained that this was not merely a demonstration, not merely an experience to witness from a distance. It was an invitation to become, to step fully into the template of human potential, to realign every cell, every perception, every pulse of being with the state that had allowed Jesus to heal, to transform, to anchor love as a measurable force. I could feel the implications threading through me. Accepting meant leaving behind fear, judgment, and separation. It meant dissolving every habitual limitation and allowing perception to expand beyond the human mind's ordinary capacity. It meant recognizing the invisible currents that shaped reality, sensing the resonance in all life, feeling the vibrational heartbeat of the world itself. Zarek conveyed that the process was gradual yet instantaneous, a paradox that would rewrite the rules of experience, embedding clarity, compassion, and understanding at every level of awareness. The chamber seemed to pulse with expectation as Zarek waited. Kevin, the silence itself became a weight, a vibrating question, a reflection of every hesitation within me. Accepting would awaken a state long dormant, a frequency humanity had abandoned through fear and forgetfulness. Declining would preserve the comfort of familiar perception, but the knowledge of possibility would remain, a whisper that could never be unheard. Zarek transmitted certainty into my chest. The activation was not reward, not punishment, not magic. It was restoration. It was a return to what had always been encoded in the human heart. Kevin, the choice was mine, but its consequences would extend far beyond me. The frequency I could embrace was the same frequency that had once healed, united, and transformed countless lives. And once it began, there would be no turning back. The chamber pulsed as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for the answer that would alter everything. The chamber seemed to expand, as if the boundaries of space itself were loosening, dissolving into layers of light and vibration. Kevin, I could feel every cell in my body resonating with a strange, electric anticipation. A pulse that was not mine alone but shared with the unseen architecture of the universe. Zarek's presence enveloped me completely, a subtle force that did not push or pull, but simply aligned, tuning perception to frequencies I had never imagined. And then he spoke, his voice reverberating directly in my mind, carrying a weight that made comprehension both immediate and impossible. Jesus was not the exception, Kevin. He was the prototype. The words reverberated through every layer of awareness, penetrating the patterns of thought, the protective narratives of a lifetime. I understood that all my assumptions about divinity, about miracles, about human limitation, had been incomplete. Humanity had never been meant to kneel in awe or to surrender power to intermediaries. Humanity had always carried the capacity to access the same state, to anchor the same frequency, to enact the same transformation. The story of Jesus was not singular because of him alone, but singular because the memory of this state had been buried for millennia, obscured by fear, ego, and collective forgetfulness. Kevin, I sensed the enormity of what was being revealed. Every human heart, every mind, conditioned by centuries of separation, carried dormant echoes of this frequency, waiting for activation, waiting for recognition. The path Jesus demonstrated was never a gift to be worshipped. It was a template to be remembered, an inheritance of vibration that could awaken in anyone willing to align with it. Every act of love, every moment of compassion, every choice to rise above fear and judgment was a step toward reclaiming what had never truly been lost. Zarek's transmission unfolded visions of countless humans across history, unrecognized carriers of the same potential, whose lives had flickered briefly with resonance before the weight of inherited limitation pressed them back into the ordinary. And I realized that this moment, this revelation, was not about me alone. It was about the awakening of consciousness itself, a reminder that the evolution of humanity had always been tethered to recognition, not worship. Kevin, I could feel the pulse of possibility expand outward, touching the contours of thought and reality simultaneously. Jesus had shown the mechanics of living at a frequency of love, clarity, and presence. The world had misinterpreted the method as miraculous, as unattainable. But it was neither supernatural nor exclusive. It was natural, inherent, waiting for humans to remember, to activate, to align. And as Zarek's presence began to recede, the chamber quieting but still alive with residual resonance, the clarity settled deep in my consciousness. Humanity's destiny had never been to venerate. It had been to awaken, to reclaim the prototype encoded in every heart, to realize that each life carried the capacity to embody the frequency that Jesus demonstrated, to restore connection, to dissolve separation, to awaken fully. Kevin, I understood at last that the story was never about one man's divinity. It was about the potential encoded in all of us, waiting, resonating, calling us home.